The night of the celebration in Nairobi was one everyone had been talking about for weeks. The grand hall glittered with golden lights, chandeliers glowing above silk-draped tables, and music filling the air. Families in elegant outfits arrived in shiny cars, laughter spilling out before they even reached the doors. It was the kind of party where people came not just to celebrate, but also to be seen, to show off their finest clothes and biggest smiles. Amara stood quietly near the entrance, clutching her small purse. She had almost refused the invitation, unsure if she belonged in such a glamorous setting. Though she worked hard every day and carried herself with kindness, she often felt overshadowed by her younger sister Zuri. Where Amara was gentle, Zuri was bold. Where Amara tried to bring peace, Zuri thrived on attention. And tonight, Zuri had made sure she shone brightest, walking into the hall in a sparkling dress that turned every head. From the moment Amara arrived, she could feel her sister's eyes on her. Zuri's smile was wide, but it was the kind of smile that hid something sharp beneath it. Amara knew that look all too well. Growing up, Zuri's jealousy had always followed her like a shadow, twisting into small cruelties. Tonight, it seemed stronger than ever. As guests greeted each other with hugs and laughter, Amara tried to blend in, to enjoy the evening quietly. But in her heart, she sensed that Zuri had come with a plan, one meant not to celebrate family, but to tear her down. The music played softly in the background, waiters gliding between tables with trays of wine and plates of sweet cakes. The hall sparkled, but something darker was moving quietly through the glitter. Zuri, dressed in her shining gown, leaned close to one guest after another, her voice low, her words carefully chosen. She smiled as she spoke, but behind that smile were whispers sharp enough to cut. She betrayed the family, Zuri murmured to an aunt, pretending to be pained by her own story. She took advantage of our trust. I wish it wasn't true. The aunt's eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth in shock. Zuri pretended to wipe at an invisible tear, as if speaking against Amara broke her heart. Then she slipped away, leaving her aunt full of questions and a seed of doubt. One by one, she moved through the crowd, spreading her tale like perfume. It drifted quickly, carried on curious lips. At first, people whispered in corners, glancing at Amara when they thought she wasn't looking. Then the whispers grew bolder, spilling into laughter here, frowns there, polite nods that carried hidden judgment. By the time the music swelled again, nearly half the room had heard Zuri's version of the truth. Amara could feel it before she even understood it. The shift in the air, the way smiles at her seemed tighter, the way conversations stopped when she walked past. Her heart began to pound, though she tried to hold her head high. She didn't know exactly what had been said, but she felt it clinging to her, crawling across the room like smoke. At one point, she caught sight of her mother speaking with two family friends. They leaned in as her mother shook her head, and Amara's chest tightened. Was her own mother doubting her now? She wanted to speak, to shout that whatever was being said wasn't true. But her throat closed, and she swallowed the words. Silence pressed down on her, heavy and painful. Zuri, meanwhile, thrived on the growing tension. She laughed louder, gestured more grandly, her presence impossible to ignore. Every time she glanced at Amara, her eyes glimmered with satisfaction, as if each cruel whisper was another jewel in her crown. Amara stood near the edge of the hall, her fingers twisting together, her eyes lowered to the marble floor. She felt like a shadow in the middle of the lights, alone among people she had known her whole life. The music that once sounded sweet now seemed mocking. Her heart broke quietly, not because of the lies themselves, but because of how quickly people believed them. She wanted to disappear, to run from the glittering hall and escape the eyes that burned into her. Yet she stayed, silent and trembling, because deep down she still hoped someone, anyone, would see through the lies. But as the whispers grew louder, Amara realized she was standing in the middle of a storm her sister had created, and no one was reaching for her hand. The evening had grown heavy for Amara. She stood quietly near a table, pretending to admire the tall flower arrangements while inside her chest her heart ached. She had already felt the whispers crawling all around her, like smoke she couldn't escape. Just when she thought things couldn't get worse, Zuri decided it was time to strike. With a dramatic clap of her hands, Zuri called for attention. The music softened, and curious faces turned toward her. She stood tall in her glittering dress, eyes bright with false courage, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "There is something I can no longer keep inside," she announced, her tone full of practiced sorrow. "I have tried to protect my sister, but I cannot stay silent while she destroys our family's trust." Gasps filled the air. Heads turned, all eyes landing on Amara. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. Zuri stepped closer to her, as if drawing her into the center of a stage. "She is a liar," Zuri said firmly, pointing a trembling finger at Amara. "She is a cheat. She betrayed us all, and yet she stands here pretending to be innocent. How long will we let her fool us?" The hall buzzed with voices. Some looked shocked, others already convinced. An uncle shook his head in disappointment. A cousin whispered fiercely to a neighbor. Amara wanted to speak, to scream that none of it was true, but the words tangled in her throat. Her silence seemed to confirm Zuri's lies, and the crowd leaned further away from her. Her mother, sitting at a table near the front, buried her face in her hand. The sight shattered Amara's heart. She felt her knees weaken, her body trembling as though the ground itself was slipping away. She tried to hold her head high, but tears were already welling in her eyes. Zuri, seeing her sister's silence, pressed harder. "Tell them, Amara," she challenged loudly. "Tell them you did not do these things. Look at them in the eye and deny it." Dozens of eyes bore into Amara, demanding an answer. But fear and heartbreak locked her voice inside her chest. She shook her head slightly, tears sliding down her cheeks. That tiny motion was all the crowd needed to believe Zuri. Murmurs rose again, heavier now, tilting the room against her. Amara could no longer breathe in the heavy air of the hall. With trembling steps, she turned away, her vision blurred by tears. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she hurried toward the door. No one stopped her. No one defended her. Their silence stung worse than Zuri's words. The grand hall, full of golden lights and laughter only an hour before, now felt like a prison she had to escape. As the doors closed behind her, Amara broke into sobs, her body shaking with the pain of betrayal. Inside, the celebration continued, but for Amara, the night had already ended in heartbreak. Amara stood outside the hall, her hands pressed against her face, trying to hold back the flood of tears. The night air was cool, but it did nothing to soothe the fire of shame burning inside her. She had never felt so small, so alone. Everyone she loved had turned against her with just a few words from Zuri. Her chest hurt as though it would break. She leaned against a pillar, gasping quietly, when a soft voice called her name. "Amara?" She turned quickly, startled, and there he was, Chike, her childhood friend, the boy who used to run through dusty village streets with her, now a grown man with a calm strength in his eyes. He had become a filmmaker, well-traveled, confident. But in that moment he looked at her with the same kindness he always had. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "I saw what happened in there," he said gently. "I'm so sorry. You don't deserve this." Amara's lips trembled. She wanted to answer, but her voice broke, and all that came out was a sob. Chike pulled her into a comforting embrace, holding her like a brother would. For the first time that night, Amara didn't feel completely abandoned. When she calmed a little, Chike leaned closer. His voice lowered, serious now. "Amara, listen to me. I have something that might change everything." Her brows furrowed, her tear-stained eyes searching his face. "What do you mean?" Chike hesitated for a moment, then continued. "A few days ago, I was filming at another event. I caught something on camera, something about Zuri. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But after what I just witnessed inside, I realized what I have is proof. Proof that you've been set up." Amara blinked, hardly daring to hope. "Proof?" she whispered. "Yes," he nodded firmly. "A recording. It shows Zuri talking with one of her friends, planning things that explain all of this." He squeezed her hands. "But you need to trust me. Don't confront her now. Don't run away. Let me handle this. I'll find the right moment to show everyone the truth." Amara's heart pounded, torn between relief and fear. Could she really put her faith in him? Everyone else had turned their back on her. But looking into Chike's eyes, steady and honest, she felt a spark of the trust she had carried since they were children. Her voice was small but certain. "I trust you, Chike." He gave her a soft smile, one that carried both comfort and determination. "Good. Then hold your head high. They think this is your ending, but it isn't. Tomorrow, or maybe even tonight, they will see the truth." For the first time that evening, Amara felt a flicker of hope. The storm wasn't over, but she no longer faced it alone. Inside the glittering hall, the celebration carried on as though nothing tragic had just unfolded. Music swirled again, waiters poured more wine, and laughter rose to the ceiling. But now, at the very center of it all, Zuri stood like a queen who had just claimed her throne. Her dress sparkled as she moved from group to group, her smile wide, her voice full of confidence. She was glowing, and the guests fed her glow with endless praise. "You were so brave to speak up," one guest said, squeezing her hand. "It must have been so hard for you," another whispered, admiring her courage. Zuri tilted her head modestly, pretending to be burdened by her own honesty. "I didn't want to," she said softly, but loud enough for others nearby to hear. "But the truth matters, no matter how painful." Those words spread quickly, repeated by lips eager to appear close to her. Soon the story was not only about Amara's shame, but about Zuri's bravery. She was the sister who had spoken for the family, the one who had exposed betrayal before it ruined them all. The crowd adored her, and Zuri soaked in every word like it was sweet honey. At the family's table, the mood was heavy. Aunts shook their heads sadly, uncles muttered about disappointment, cousins avoided saying Amara's name altogether. And Amara's mother sat stiffly, her eyes red from tears, but her silence was the loudest wound of all. She had not defended her eldest daughter, had not questioned Zuri's story. She sat broken and ashamed, but her shame was directed at Amara, not at the lie. Zuri noticed. She noticed the way her mother's face turned down and the way relatives leaned closer to her instead. It thrilled her, even as she pretended to be weighed down by sadness. For years, she had lived in her sister's shadow, always second, always overlooked. But tonight, in front of the city's most polished families, Zuri finally felt she had won. Guests began clapping her on the back, lifting their glasses in her honor. To Zuri, one man toasted, for having the courage to defend what's right. The crystal glasses chimed together, and Zuri lifted hers high, a secret smile tugging at her lips. Meanwhile, whispers about Amara grew harsher. Some guests wondered aloud if she would dare show her face again. Others speculated about what exactly she had done, each version darker than the last. Amara's absence gave the lies power, and every person seemed eager to believe the worst. If Amara had been standing there, she would have felt the sting of each careless word. But even from outside, she could still sense it, like the whole hall had turned into a stage for her humiliation. The family she had worked so hard to honor now turned their backs, and even her mother's silence felt like betrayal. And inside, surrounded by lights and music, Zuri smiled like a star finally burning at its brightest, blind to the darkness she had created. The night was at its peak. Laughter filled the golden hall, music poured from the band, and Zuri stood shining at the center of it all. She thought she had already won. Guests circled her like bees around honey, praising her boldness, praising her courage, praising her as though she had saved the family's honor. Every glance, every word lifted her higher. She believed nothing could shake her now. But quietly, Chike was at work. He had spoken with the organizers, arranged with the technicians, and made sure every detail was set. The hall had a big projector and a large screen meant for displaying memories of the family's celebrations. No one suspected it would be used for anything else. Chike, calm but determined, knew this was the only way the truth would be seen by all. As the evening rolled forward, he stepped up to the master of ceremonies and whispered something in his ear. The man nodded with interest, then tapped the microphone. The chatter dimmed, glasses stilled on tables, and everyone's eyes turned toward the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced, "before we close the night, we have something special to share with you all. A video has been prepared for this occasion. It may not be easy to watch, but truth never is." The words caught people's attention instantly. Murmurs swept through the hall. Many leaned forward eagerly, already assuming this was more proof of Amara's disgrace. Heads turned toward Zuri, who stood with her chin lifted, her smile calm but full of triumph. She folded her arms gracefully, ready to watch her sister's final ruin. "Yes," she whispered to a cousin beside her, "the truth must be seen." Her eyes glittered, certain of her victory. The lights in the hall dimmed, the chandeliers glowing softly while the giant screen came to life. The room grew silent except for the gentle hum of the projector. People shuffled in their seats, excitement buzzing like electricity. Some guests whispered about what the video might show. Amara crying, Amara admitting something, Amara caught in betrayal. They were hungry for scandal, and they thought Zuri was about to feed them. Amara, standing near the door with her heart pounding, looked toward Chike. He gave her the smallest nod, a silent promise that she was not alone. She pressed her hands together, praying silently for courage. Zuri smoothed her gown, her lips curved into a smile that was both sweet and sharp. This was her moment, the crown jewel of her performance. In her mind, she could already hear the applause, already feel the final collapse of her sister's dignity. The screen flickered, and the video began. Every eye locked on the glowing images. The crowd leaned forward, breath held, ready for the so-called truth that would seal Amara's fate. Zuri's smile widened, sure that victory was hers. She had no idea that in a few seconds, the glittering hall would fall into gasps and silence, and the ground beneath her would finally break. The hall was silent as the video flickered to life. At first, the screen showed a quiet garden, the sound of birds in the background. People frowned in confusion, wondering what this had to do with Amara. Then two figures appeared. The camera wasn't close, but clear enough for everyone to recognize Zuri and her closest friend. Zuri's laugh rang out, sharp and confident. "It will be perfect," she said in the recording. "All I have to do is tell them Amara betrayed us. They'll believe me, they always do. She's too quiet to fight back." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Heads turned sharply toward Zuri, who sat frozen, her smile fading. On the screen, her friend whispered, "But won't she defend herself?" Zuri shook her head with a smirk. "No, that's the beauty of it. Amara never speaks up. She'll stand there crying, and everyone will see what I want them to see, a guilty woman." Gasps erupted across the hall. A few guests covered their mouths. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The once adoring faces that surrounded Zuri now twisted with confusion and anger. The recording continued, showing Zuri leaning closer, her voice dripping with venom. I've lived in her shadow long enough. Tonight I take it all. They will love me, not her. They will finally see who matters. The words hit the hall like a thunderclap. The chandeliers glowed above a sea of stunned faces. Some guests muttered prayers under their breath. Others simply stared at the screen as though they could not believe what they were hearing. Then the camera caught Zuri laughing again, her friend nervously joining in. By the time I'm done, she boasted, Amara will never lift her head again. That final line sent a heavy silence crashing down. The video ended, the screen fading to black, but the echoes of Zuri's voice still hung in the air. For a moment, no one moved. The band stood frozen, the waiters stopped in their tracks, even the children went quiet. All eyes turned toward Zuri, who sat stiff in her chair, her face pale, her lips trembling as if the ground beneath her had vanished. Is this true? Someone whispered loudly, breaking the silence. Others began murmuring, their voices sharp and accusing. Zuri shook her head desperately, but the recording had been clear, undeniable. Amara stood near the doorway, her tears drying on her cheeks. For the first time all evening, she wasn't the one carrying shame. She wasn't the liar, wasn't the weak one. She was the sister who had been betrayed. Gasps turned into angry voices, questions firing across the room. How could you do this? Your own sister? All this was a lie? Zuri's chest rose and fell quickly, her eyes darting around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to defend her. But no one did. The truth had been shown on the giant screen, and there was no taking it back. The hall erupted like a storm after the video ended. The glittering chandeliers and golden tables no longer felt warm. They seemed to shine a harsh light on Zuri, as though exposing her for everyone to see. Guests who had just moments before praised her now pulled back in disgust. Their eyes, once admiring, turned sharp and accusing. How could you lie like this? A woman gasped. To your own sister? Another man demanded, his voice heavy with anger. What kind of heart does that? Someone whispered loudly enough for all to hear. Zuri shook her head quickly, her hands lifted as if she could push the words away. No, it's not what it looks like, she tried to protest, her voice cracking. It was just a joke. I didn't mean. But the excuses fell flat. Everyone had heard the malice in her laughter, the hunger in her words. It was undeniable. Her family sat stiffly, their shame heavy in their eyes. An uncle muttered, we clapped for her, we praised her, and it was all a lie. A cousin covered her face, embarrassed to even be related to her. And her mother, who had remained silent before, now looked at Zuri with tears not of pride, but of deep disappointment. She could not even raise her head to face the crowd. Zuri's carefully built image crumbled piece by piece. Guests turned away from her, some shaking their heads, others whispering that they would never trust her again. The same people who once adored her now wanted nothing to do with her. It was like watching a star fall from the sky, burning out before it even touched the ground. Amara stood near the door, silent. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't even move. She simply held herself tall, her face calm though her heart was still aching. She had no need to say anything. The truth had spoken. For years she had been quiet, and tonight her silence had finally revealed her strength. The crowd's attention shifted again, this time toward her. Some guests looked guilty for believing the lies. Others lowered their eyes, ashamed of how quickly they had turned against her. Amara met no one's gaze. She stood with quiet dignity, her hands clasped in front of her, her posture steady. Zuri, meanwhile, began to tremble. Please, she begged, her eyes darting from face to face. You have to believe me. I didn't mean it. I only wanted. But her voice broke into sobs, and no one reached out to comfort her. The attention she had once craved now turned into a weight that crushed her. The same hall where she had tasted her greatest triumph was now the place of her greatest fall. The very people she wanted to impress watched her reputation collapse, and nothing she said could save it. And through it all, Amara remained still, her dignity intact, shining brighter than any jewel in the room. The hall was still heavy with shock. Zuri sat in silence, her head bowed, her gown no longer glittering, but looking like a costume stripped of meaning. Guests avoided her now, turning instead to where Amara stood quietly near the door. For a long moment, no one moved. Then her mother rose slowly from her chair, her face wet with tears. She walked toward Amara with unsteady steps. My child, she whispered, her voice breaking. Forgive me. I doubted you when I should have defended you. I let her words blind me. She reached for Amara's hands, clutching them tightly, as if afraid her daughter would slip away. One by one, other family members followed. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all ashamed, all begging for forgiveness. They lowered their heads, unable to meet her eyes. They had chosen to believe Zuri so easily, and now the weight of their mistake pressed down on them. Amara felt the sting of their betrayal all over again, but she also saw the honesty in their regret. Tears blurred her eyes as she looked around the circle of faces she had grown up with, people who had once felt like her whole world. Then Chike stepped forward. He had been standing close, watching with quiet strength. He gave her a small nod, his voice steady. Amara, you don't have to stay silent anymore. This is your moment. Speak. Let them hear you. His words gave her courage. Amara took a shaky breath, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time that night, she let her voice rise above the whispers and the music. I was hurt, she said, her voice soft but clear. The hall quieted instantly. Hurt that my own blood could do this to me. Hurt that none of you stood beside me when I needed you most. I will not pretend those wounds don't exist. Her eyes swept across the room, steady despite the tears. But I will not let bitterness take me. I will not let Zuri's jealousy change the person I am. I forgive you all for doubting me, for believing lies, but I will not forget. I have learned tonight that silence is not always strength. Sometimes strength is speaking, even when your voice shakes. The hall remained hushed, every guest listening as though her words were jewels dropping into their hearts. Her mother wept openly, nodding at each word. Chike smiled faintly, proud of the courage she had found. Amara lowered her hands slowly, her breathing calm again. She had not shouted, had not demanded revenge. She had chosen grace, but a grace that did not erase her pain. It was strength wrapped in forgiveness, and it carried more power than any of Zuri's false victory. The family, the guests, even the musicians seemed changed by her words. For the first time that night, Amara was not a shadow, not a victim. She was the voice of truth, and her quiet dignity filled the room like light breaking through darkness. The music had stopped, but the sound of silence was louder than any song. Amara stood tall, her face calm, her tears dry. She had spoken her truth, and it had settled into the hearts of everyone present. The same people who had once turned against her now rose to their feet, clapping softly at first, then louder, until the hall echoed with their applause. It was not just for her forgiveness. It was for her strength, her dignity, her grace. Amara looked around one last time. She saw her family weeping, her mother reaching out as if to hold her, and Chike standing steady by her side, his eyes full of pride. She gave them all a small, gentle smile, but she knew her path was no longer inside those walls. She had carried too much pain there, and now it was time to step into something new. Her heels clicked softly as she walked across the marble floor. The crowd parted for her, not with pity, but with respect. Heads bowed, hands touched hearts, and the applause followed her to the doors. Amara walked out not as the woman disgraced, but as the woman who had survived. Behind her, Zuri sat alone, her body shaking, her makeup streaked with tears. The spotlight she had craved had become a harsh glare, exposing every crack in her soul. In that silence, she realized the truth. Her envy had destroyed the very life she wanted. No crown, no applause, no love remained for her. Outside, the night air was cool and full of stars. Amara lifted her head high, her steps steady, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She was walking out of the hall, but also into a brighter, freer future.